Welcome to the first of 4 scheduled online forums to provide information and answer questions about the town's clean water plan. My name is Patrick Cassidy. I'll be facilitating these conversations. A full schedule of the forums has been posted to the town's website, to its Facebook page, and you should have received a copy in your email if you're with us today. Feel free to share that information with your friends, your family, your neighbors, get the word out about the other sessions that are coming up, including one tonight we'll talk a little bit more about later. As I mentioned to you in the email you would have received with the link for this forum and for tonight's forum, I'll be sending out another email with links to the other 2 forums that are coming up in a separate email at that point. We'll get started shortly, but just a few basic ground rules. Everyone but the panelists will be on mute to start. Please don't unmute yourself during the presentations or until you're called on to ask a question. And again, this would be the cue for my dogs to start whining in the background. We've all been on Zoom a lot this year, but just in case you're unsure where that mute button is on a computer, it's usually down on the left-hand side near the video button as well. The panelists are generally going to be spotlighted unless they're sharing slides. While they're talking or once they've finished, you can indicate that you have a question by one of a few different methods. And again, for everyone getting on just now, we are recording this session. You can hit the reaction button down at the bottom of your screen, click your raised hand button. You can use the chat feature also at the bottom of the screen to send a message to me, the host, that you have a question, or you can even include that question in the chat itself. Or you can raise your hand physically. I'll try and be looking around and making sure that if somebody has their hand up that I call on them. Once you're called on, and again, this is after all the panelists have done speaking, you can be unmuted, or if you unmute yourself and ask your question, but please remember to mute yourself afterwards so other people can hear what's going on and ask questions. And then finally, as a last resort, in that email, there would have been a cell phone number that you can text question mark and your name to, and that's a way to get my attention to make sure that your question gets in the queue. This is time for questions, not statements or promotions of any kind. If you have any questions that we can't answer immediately, I'll endeavor to get an answer to you after the forum has ended. Once everyone who wants to has asked a question or had a chance to ask a question, you can go through the same process to ask a second or a follow-up question after that. This first forum is entitled "What's the Plan?" and includes Anastasia Rudenko, an engineer with GHD. That's the firm that has been working closely with the town to design this project. Donovan McElligat, the town's Shellfish Constable, who will discuss the town's shellfish program and how it helps remove nitrogen from Mashpee's bays and saltwater ponds. And finally, Selectman Andrew Gottlieb will discuss how phase 1 of the plan fits into the bigger picture, as well as a little bit about maybe how the project's funded, a topic that's going to be discussed in more detail at tonight's forum and also again on Thursday. That's a repeat of the same sort of forum. You can attend one or the other of those if you're interested in that topic. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Anastasia, and she can share her screen. And again, as I admit a few more people here, I'll remind everybody that we're recording this session. And if I haven't muted you and you can mute yourself, that would be appreciated.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Can everybody see my slideshow? Perfect. So I am Anastasia Rudenko. I am the project manager for the design of the Mashpee Water Resource Recovery Facility and Collection System. And I'll be giving a brief overview of the infrastructure that we're designing, and will be available for questions throughout this forum. I'll start with the Water Resource Recovery Facility itself, highlighting the site layout and the processes that are used to break down nitrogen within the facility, and then give an overview of the stage 1 collection system, an outline of the service area and the pump stations that are part of that collection system. So this is a figure that shows the site layout. Mashpee's recommended plan calls for up to 4 stages of wastewater infrastructure at the municipal parcel to the east of the transfer station. So looking at our layout, to the right is north, to the west is the Mashpee transfer station, to the south, Asher's Lane, and to the east, Carlton Drive. We are currently designing stage 1 infrastructure, but have designed the facility to be able to have all of the infrastructure for all 4 stages within the footprint of the facility, which is shown in green here. So that footprint is defined by fencing around the site and landscape buffering. And in addition to that, we've been maintaining at least 150 feet of buffer from the site to property boundaries. To the south of the layout is where the wastewater infrastructure will be. What's shown in yellow is stage 1 infrastructure. There'll be 2 buildings, which I'll discuss in a little more detail in a minute, and a series of underground covered tanks. And then what's shown in black dotted lines is space that's been reserved for the future stages of infrastructure. Once the water is processed through the wastewater treatment facility, it'll be recharged to groundwater through 4 open sand beds in stage 1. And then to the north, there's been space reserved for future stages of sand beds. The infrastructure has been designed so that all of the treatment processes are either within a building or are in underground and covered tankage. The first building on the site is called the Preliminary Treatment Building. And so this houses a series of screens and a grit removal system, which takes the larger material that's in wastewater out of the wastewater before it goes to the treatment process. And this is a rendering of what the inside of that building will look like, with a coarse screen and a series of fine screens and the grit removal equipment. All of the equipment for this process will be within the building itself, and all of the air within the building will be ducted underground to an odor control system. The second building on the site is called the process building. So once the wastewater has undergone preliminary treatment, it is conveyed to the process tanks. And this is where nitrogen breakdown happens. These are tanks that are underground and are covered. And this rendering here shows all 4 stages. So for the first stage, there would be 2 tanks that are constructed. Once the wastewater has been treated for nitrogen removal, it'll be conveyed to the UV disinfection room, where UV modules will be used to disinfect the water prior to effluent recharge. And the process building also holds a series of pump rooms. So the pumps are used to convey the water to the different treatment processes in the facility. It includes a blower room. The blower conveys air to the treatment process to aid in the nitrogen breakdown, and it includes a chemical room for the processes. Once the water has been treated and disinfected, it'll be conveyed to open sand beds. So this is an example of what open sand beds look like from Oak Bluffs, Massachusetts. The water will be discharged through pipes in the middle of the beds and will percolate through the sand to groundwater. All of the air in the preliminary treatment building and in the headspace of the tanks, so that's the air between the cover and between the water, will be conveyed through underground ductwork to a 2-stage odor control system. The first stage is a biological process, a biofilter, where there are bugs that break down the potentially odorous compounds in the air. And then the facility will also have the ability to convey that air to a secondary process, which is a carbon absorption system. And that's a physical process where potentially odorous compounds bind to active sites in the carbon vessel prior to being introduced back to the atmosphere. The wastewater that will be treated at the plants will be coming from the service area, which is highlighted here in yellow. The system has been designed to be a primarily gravity system. So that means the majority of the properties in the system, wastewater will be able to convey by gravity from the house through a lateral to the collection system. And there's a small portion of properties, 10 properties, that will be connected through low pressure, which means that they'll have a small grinder pump in their house that will pump the wastewater to the collection system due to the elevation of that house. The service area extends to the northeast and to the south of the treatment facility, and we'll have 2 pumping stations which are used to convey the flow to the facility itself. All of the pump stations will have a very similar layout. There's submersible pump stations, which means the pumps are housed in a wet well that's below grade with a cover on it, and has a valve vault, which is another vault below grade that's used to control the flow in the pump station. The control panels for the pump station will be housed in a small electrical building that's about 20 feet by 20 feet, and each station will have an outside generator that will be fenced to provide emergency power if needed. And this is the typical layout that will be used for all of the pump stations. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on was just what the pump stations look like. So this is grade. So the majority of this infrastructure will be underground with a cover. This is where the pumps sit and the valve vault. And this is a rendering of what the electrical buildings will look like.
Great, thank you, Anastasia. And just a reminder to everybody, again, you're welcome to, if you don't want to forget it, you're welcome to chat your question to me. I'm just sending a hi to everybody there so you can see the chat feature show up in case you weren't aware where it was. But you'd be chatting directly to me, the host in this case. And then again, just a reminder that you can also use, once we get to this point, the raised hand feature, and you can see my hand that went up. You do want to lower it potentially after you have asked your question, or I'll kind of figure out that I've already talked to you. But again, we've had a few people join since we started, and I just wanted to remind everybody that we're recording this at this point. We're recording audio here. Potentially for rebroadcast. Just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. And now, Donovan, you're up.
All righty. Do I have the ability to share my PowerPoint?
You should be able to share your screen, yes, if you hit share screen and click on the PowerPoint. You good, Donovan? You see the share screen green button down at the bottom?
Ah, yeah.
And then it should bring up the ability to do that. Perfect.
All righty. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Donovan McElligat. I'm the Shellfish Constable, or Shellfish Warden, for the town of Mashpee. So I oversee all the shellfish propagation efforts that the town has throughout all the water bodies in Mashpee. Kind of a common question that I get is, what exactly do shellfish have to do with water quality? And the short answer is that they're filter feeders. So during their natural life process, they actually take in nitrogen and other particles in the water, and through a process called nitrogen fixation, they actually remove the nitrogen from the water. So they can be a good resource to cleaning up the waterways. So this first slide here just kind of focuses on a study that was done between 2004 and 2011 that sets out the number of shellfish for the Wilcoit Bay water systems, which include Little River and Great River, to show how many shellfish per year, as you can see in this last column, would be needed in each water body to be able to remove the appropriate amount of nitrogen that would get us to a more normal level. So that would be these waterways here with Great River and Little River here. So our plan, we've been taking smaller shellfish and through our own infrastructure with the town, growing them to a larger size. Through that process, we're able to buy a larger quantity of shellfish at the smaller size, and we're able to grow them to a bigger size so that when we put them out in the water, we can reach a higher level of survivability, so they can continue their life phase out in the waterways and focus on the nitrogen removal from the water. These are some of the systems that we have in place at our facilities down in Little River. These are floating upweller systems, which, as you can see in the bottom here, contain somewhere between 50 and 100,000 seed per silo. And this process is seasonal and normally takes place during the summer months, with most of the seed, as we call it, going out into the waterways in the fall. As you can see, as they get bigger and bigger, they titrate out into the open water like this, where they are purely filtering on the raw seawater or natural seawater that's in the water. And when they're about this size, we take them from any kind of containment apparatus we have, whether it be a cage, a net, a silo, anything like that. And we do what's called broadcasting, which is basically just distributing them by hand to water systems in the target areas that the nitrogen plan calls for. Some pictures: we have worked with other agencies like AmeriCorps, volunteer programs, because it is a large effort when we're dealing with millions and millions of seed that the plan calls for in order to broadcast them. So it has been a partner effort between town, some NGOs, and volunteer programs. So these are some of the years. As you can see, when we started in 2014, we've slowly increased the numbers that we've gotten each year. And then these numbers are what happens, what goes into the water after our growing phases in the summer. And that's something that I kind of want to highlight here. As you can see, these numbers fluctuate a little bit. And that is due to the mother nature factor, as I call it. Sometimes it's just unpredictable depending on the food that's in the water, any kind of nature events that we have. And so you can see, even with purchasing the same amount of seed between 2016 and 2017, we had a banner year in 2017, which, even though 2016 was a good year and it was an increase as we came up, this year was especially good just due to an unnaturally high amount of food that we had in the water that year. So there is some flux that we can't fully control for, but we do our best every year to try and hit another benchmark of getting more and more seed out in the out into the waterways. And due to the nature of aquaculture, the growing of any kind of oysters or clams being so site specific, we have had to try some trial and error for what methods work best within the different water bodies in Mashpee. But on the whole, and areas that we've concentrated on, this LR to GR is Little River and Great River, upriver and Great River, and Hamblin Pond, which are some areas that we've really concentrated on. We have noticed throughout the years a steady reduction in nitrogen that shows that the efforts have been effective. While they're not quite at their target, we are hoping to get there as we fine-tune the growing methods, fine-tune the areas in which we plant, and we fine-tune our infrastructure that we have down at Little River in order to increase the capacity of seed that we can take on each year. We know this is happening because we do a lot of water quality in the Natural Resources Department, especially during the summer. We do it in partnership with the SMAS, the universities, the town, and partnership with the tribe. We have some permanent stations around town, And then we have other stations that we do on a monthly basis where we'll collect the samples and send them off for processing. And those have been really beneficial in order to show that oysters and clams can reduce nitrogen loading, even in nitrogen-enriched waters. So these are just some of the key findings that we found over the phases that we've done over the years. And what we found has been promising. We found that chlorophyll, which is basically the algae in the water, so it's the food that the various animals eat. We found that both that and nitrogen downstream of these concentrated areas where we've been growing animals has been significantly lower. And you know, when we control for all the other variables, it's been found that it pretty much has to be the shellfish that are having this effect, especially on different parts of the tide. When there are high algae blooms, it is normally associated with increased nitrogen loading in the water. And when there are high algae blooms, they can result in things called fish kills, where the dissolved oxygen in the water results in there not being enough oxygen for certain species of fish to survive in the water. We did have a fish kill about 10 years ago in the Mashpee River. Since we have started the shellfish program, we have had higher increased dissolved oxygen in the water and no fish kills. So it shows us that we are on the right track. One thing that it is important to note is that aquaculture, the town's propagation programs, is only a supplement to the overarching plan that Mashpee has to reduce nitrogen. If we were to hit a reasonable benchmark, which we're looking to aim to hit within the next 1 to 2 years of removing about 1.5 million oysters per year from the Mashpee River, the studies we've done that show each oyster contains, after its full growing period, has about 500 grams of nitrogen in them. That would reduce the watershed nitrogen loading by about 15%. Higher than that is clearly possible. It just, you know, in the whole chain of events, it is a multi-part thing. So we would need to be able to increase the amount of oysters that we could remove from the waterways, or clams, which really is an important thing that we're looking into, is boosting the commercial fishing industry areas and more rec areas in the town of Mashpee in order to, you know, fulfill the last part of the plan, which is the removal of the shellfish from the water. We're starting to switch to these pieces of gear. These are called hotel cages. And what's significant about them is that they allow you to keep a lot of oysters in a very small footprint. So as we add more and more shellfish to the water, it becomes important to have places to put them. And so oyster cages allow us to work in a 3D space. They allow us to keep more oysters and move up as opposed to expanding outwards. So this is the next phase of the Shellfish Division's plan in order to add more shellfish to the water in a smaller footprint. This just goes to show right here, we had about 72,000 pecks of oysters removed this year from our recreational oyster fishery at the Mashpee Neck Landing. It was down a little bit due to COVID this year, but this is really the target focus for the Shellfish Division going forward, because we're looking to open up an additional recreational oyster fishery and really get the word out there that it is available to residents of Mashpee, and that should enable us to remove a significant amount of oysters from the water. Again, this just kind of goes back to the partners that we have for monitoring the water quality in Mashpee. We do everything from monitor catch data from the commercial side of things. We monitor what we put out in recreational areas, and then we work with University of Massachusetts, the Wampanoag tribe, and actually some other partners in order to, constantly collect the data that we have to be able to see what impact we've been having. And I think the takeaway from that is that we are having a positive impact on the water bodies, especially when it comes to nitrogen loading. And some acknowledgements, and that's it.
Great, thank you, Donovan. You can hit the stop share, and then we'll get back to Andrew, and I'm just gonna.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming today. So I think what you've just heard is sort of how two pieces of our plan sort of work in tandem with one another. And what I'd like everybody to sort of take away from this discussion is that the investment that the town's made in the shell fishing program has a lot of natural resource benefits, a lot of aesthetic and recreational opportunity benefits, but it also has an important role to play in reducing the impact of nitrogen in our environment once it's already gotten into the environment, and using the shellfish program as a way to help scrub the water from that legacy nitrogen that's already in the groundwater and moving to and hitting the bays before it has an opportunity to degrade the resource. But it's not enough by itself. And I think Donovan's discussion really highlighted that. And that's why we have the infrastructure component of this program. Having done a relatively lengthy multi-year analysis of our waterways and what the carrying capacity of our resources are, it was determined that most cost-effective combination of approaches to utilize is the shell fishing program supplemented by a targeted sewering program. And Patrick, if you could bring up the 5-phase map, please. The essence of the plan that is before the town is right now phase 1, which is a little small here. I don't know if we can make that. Can we make it the presentation a little bigger?
Give me 1 second and I'll pull it up in a different way.
Yeah. But basically, we have a 5-phase program that involves expanding the areas that require treatment and collection of our wastewater until we reach the point where we've achieved our water quality goal in the bays. The hope and expectation is that we will not have to implement all 5 phases. What you're seeing on that map, the pink areas, it constitutes phase 1. And that core area around the cursor now, around the landfill transfer station area, down Quiniquisette Avenue along Mashpee Neck towards the portion of the Mashpee River woodlands. And that is the portion of this project that is before town meeting right now. That will, in tandem with the work that Donovan described, begin the process of improving and restoring the water quality of Popponesset Bay. We will then move eventually to phase 2. Phase 2 is the area in light blue, which you'll see, continues along down south further towards Popponesset Bay, and then to the western portion of town, beginning the work that would remediate the water quality in Wacoit Bay as well. It's pretty clear that phases 1 and phase 2 are going to be necessary. Clearly, phase 1 absolutely is necessary. And obviously, nothing's going to get better in Wacoit until we begin phase 2. The rest of it, though, depends on how well the shellfish program works and how the system responds to the management interventions that we're taking to limit the flow of nitrogen through those watersheds to those estuarine areas. And we will proceed and ask voter approval in the future for subsequent phases based on what we're actually seeing in the water, in the bays themselves. But the question before you right now is going to be the pink area, phase 1. Each individual additional phase will be a discrete project that will go through much the same process that this project has gone through, of being preliminarily designed, cost estimates, going to town meeting to get that design funding approval, and then going to town meeting to seek construction authorization. So there'll be multiple opportunities at each phase for the voters to weigh in on the program, on the merits of each individual phase, with an understanding of how our waterways have responded to what we're actually doing. So, you know, what I think we'd like you all to take away from this is that the phasing of this project was done to break it up into manageable bite-sized pieces. The design, construction, implementation of a sewering program is a complicated and time-consuming and somewhat disruptive process. So, you know, you see towns like ours up and down the Cape adopting their programs on a phased basis so that we can work in over time all of those complications and all of that construction and all of that financing at a rate which is manageable for the community. So you're not digging up the entire community at once. Then you have an opportunity to see how the system responds to what you're doing before you make the next level of investment, and then the next level of investment on top of that. We have the option as a community to stop doing phases as we go. Obviously, the objective here is to achieve a water quality goal that will reflect the restored embayment environment that has restoration of what, if you've been around town for a long time, historically was present in these waterways, naturally recurring shellfish populations, naturally recurring and maintainable eelgrass beds that provide the basis for a fundamental reproductive and habitat function for the fish species and shellfish species that rely on and reflect a healthy environment, and the ability, frankly, to stand in the water up to your waist and actually see your feet. You know, that's what it used to be around town, and that is the goal that we're trying to achieve. And through many decades of study, determination has been that it is shellfishing and targeted collection and treatment of wastewater that provides us the most reliable and cost-effective means of achieving those outcomes. Other approaches and technologies have been looked at and evaluated and determined to be either non-cost competitive or unrealistic in terms of being able to meet the water quality objective. And one of the bases of the work that we've done as a community is try to be confident that when we ask people to spend their hard-earned tax money on these projects, that the outcome that we're implementing or the method we're implementing has the probable outcome of achieving the goal that we're trying to reach. And it's been determined through local, county, state, and federal reviews that the program that's before you to vote on this spring will achieve our water quality objectives. So we need to do both. We need to keep the shellfish program up and running. And that has been something we've demonstrated we've got the ability to do over the last 4 or 5 years. And it's grown and become a model program that's looked at by other communities, but we can't get there with shellfish alone. And that's where the sewering program has to come in. So with that, I'll stop. I'll turn it back over to Patrick, and we'll tell you all that we, as he said, are running a session this evening and then again tomorrow on the finances of this project. So if you're interested in how that's going to work, we will offer a relatively deep dive into that, although to the extent we can answer questions about that today that don't interfere with talking about the shellfishing and the facility design itself, we'll attempt to do so. So Patrick.
Thanks, Andrew. So I got a few questions through the chat, and I'll read one of them to start with. And then if folks have questions, please either raise your hand virtually through the reactions button down at the bottom of your screen. You can chat me a question, or you can turn on your video and raise your hand the old-fashioned way with your actual hand. The first question that came through from somebody was, Will the system generate solids that will have to be disposed of elsewhere, presumably the sewer system itself versus the shellfishing? And I guess the question goes to Anastasia or Andrew, whichever.
I'll let Anastasia take that one.
I can take that one. So there are biosolids that are produced from the process. They are not going to be treated on site, so they will be temporarily stored in tankage and then trucked off site for treatment and disposal.
Great, thank you. Another question that came through from Mary Wagan, and Mary, if you are you able to unmute yourself? You had your response to my chat. I'm not sure I can call your number, but I could try and unmute you if you can't yourself.
Yeah, do you want me to read my question?
Yeah, go ahead and read your question. That'd be great.
I was just curious, for phase 2, is that wastewater going to be treated at the same treatment plant that's being created in phase 1?
It depends, Mary. A portion of, the portion that is south of the current phase 1 treatment area would end up at that facility. The stuff on the western side of town is being designed so that it can go one of two places. Were the town to gain access to treatment facilities at Joint Base Cape Cod, it could go there. And in the event that that's not made available to the town for a variety of complex reasons, the plan has a site located on town-owned property up on Back Road. That would be the potential site for a second wastewater treatment facility. We won't know that ultimate destination for the treatment location until we get a determination from the base as to whether they're going to make that site available to the surrounding municipalities, or whether we have to do our own.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And next question, Doug, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, or let me know if you want me to read it for you.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to. So Andrew, I was wondering, I noticed on the plan, it looks like there are 6 or so private wastewater treatment plants in town. What role would could those potentially play in the overall clean water plan?
The long-term plan for those facilities envisions them potentially becoming part of the town system. And it depends which facility you're talking about. A number of them are older facilities, sort of at the later part of their useful life. They may be viewed by the owner as an asset, but they may actually end up in the long run being more of a liability than an asset.
And I'm speaking specifically, if I may, about Southport.
Let me just answer generically about that before we get to the specifics. So it's entirely possible that it will make the most sense to, rather than rehabilitate those individual facilities, to bring them into the public system and use what is currently the treatment plant as a pump station that would take that aggregated wastewater flow from those residential areas, or light commercial or whatever they might be, and put them into the municipal system that way. We have no specific plan, and Anastasia, you can jump in if I'm not entirely accurate on the prioritization of these facilities, but we have not entered into any meaningful conversation with any owner of a private facility right now about whether they have a desire to connect to the public infrastructure at this point. I would say that it's reasonable to assume that the newer the facility and the more current it is in its ability to meet the more advanced wastewater treatment standards, the more likely it is that that stays for a longer period of time as a separate treatment works, and that the older facilities that require significant investment are the ones that are most likely to come over into a public system. But we don't have any agreements in place with anybody to do that. Our plan contemplates those facilities converting over the long haul into the public system.
Great, thank you.
All right. The next question I have, Irene, did you want to ask your question or did you want me to? It's up to you.
Sure, I'm happy to ask it. Where can we find a copy of that 5-phase implementation plan? I looked quickly on the Mashpee nitrogen plan site and I couldn't find it. If you can tell us where we could find that?
It's currently on our wastewater page. We can elevate the link for the existing nitrogen management plan into the front of the town's website, so it's a little bit easier to find. If you go on our website right now, you'll see a number of the one-pagers that Patrick has helped us develop right there on the front. We can bring the nitrogen management plan to the front as well, so it's a little bit easier to find.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Irene, Donna, would you like to ask your question or would you prefer I ask it?
I'll go ahead and ask. I know that the population is increasing in Mashpee, and I'm sorry, this might have been mentioned, but I didn't catch whether or not there's any more than what's planned right now, expansion for the increasing population that we're seeing.
The wastewater plan that the town has incorporated a build-out scenario that accounted for projected growth through the planning period with, as it could be projected at the time the plan was finalized in 2015. So it does account for future growth planning, and some of those areas in those future phases do have the prospect of homes that were not in existence at the time the plan was done being hooked up into them. So, you can only tell whether you were right about your future projections after the future has come and you look backwards, but there is some expectation of reasonable amounts of growth given what the town authorized as the rules existed in 2015.
All right, great. Dennis, your question may be related. Dennis Asselin, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, I was wondering along the lines of this being a phased program, how do you, what would be the endpoint that would make you expect to pause further development of the additional segments you talk about?
Sure. There are monitoring stations in each of our estuaries that they're known as sentinel stations, that are the location that the state evaluated to determine whether the bays were in or out of compliance with the water quality standards at the time the nitrogen loading standards were established. And those will become the monitoring points over time to determine whether the water quality parameters that are present in the bays meet the standards, and will serve as the on-off switch, if you will, for the need for future phases of the program.
John Miller, would you like to ask your question now? And you got to hit the unmute there, John. Sorry.
I'm doing that. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you. Very informative. For those people that are going to live along the sewer of phase 1 and thereafter, that obviously already have septic systems or Title V systems, presumably, what comes of those? Is there a requirement, a recommendation, a process, et cetera?
Yeah, the Sewer Commission will adopt regulations that govern the both connection and of those homes to the new sewer system, and provide the guidelines in combination with the Board of Health on the removal or retirement of the individual septic systems. So there will
So there's no guidance yet on that?
No, I mean, I think they're relatively, there are standards that are out there. The Sewer Commission will have to formally adopt them as regulations and guidelines of the Sewer Commission. and that obviously will come when it's ripe to come. You know, we obviously have to have authorization to build the facility. And then once we have that, we'll be in the position of doing the operational regulations, which will lay out what those requirements are.
Thank you.
All right, that's the questions I see in the chat. Does anybody else have any other questions? Anybody want to either physically raise their hand or send a chat to me or let us know some other way that you have a question? Anyone? All right, I'm not seeing any. I'm going to give it a quick half minute here, but just make sure. Check my phone, make sure nobody's texting me any last minute questions.
I might, I did have a comment if I could, Patrick.
A comment on what, John? Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. For those people that are following the links to the town's website where the articles for the town meeting and the special town meeting are posted, when you get down to Article 6, which is the topic here, with respect to the recommendation of the Finance Committee, of which I'm a member parenthetically, it says that the recommendation would be made on the town meeting floor. That is incorrect. The Finance Committee did vote unanimously to support Article 6 and this project.
Great, thank you, John. Thanks for that information.
Sure.
Andrew, Anastasia, or Donovan, any last minute comments before I wrap things up here? If nobody else has another question.
I'd just like to thank everybody for your attention, and I hope you found this a useful forum in which to do this. We'd be interested in your feedback. You can give it to Patrick using the email link you had from him to get to this. But you know, we're very open to finding different ways of conveying this information. So it'd be good to hear whether this was a useful exercise and what else might be helpful to you as you prepare yourself for town meeting. And no matter what you think about this project, come out to vote on May 3rd.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder here of the other forums that we do have coming up tonight at 7 p.m. The town manager, Rodney Collins, the chairman of the Sewer Commission, Tom Fudala, and Andrew Gottlieb will be on again to talk about the funding mechanisms for this plan. We're going to do a repeat of that on Thursday at 2 p.m. The idea being that somebody who might not be able to attend the one would be able to attend the other. And then the final scheduled forum at this point, and again, anybody should get in touch with me if you have any group or that you think would be interested in hearing more about a particular aspect of this through that mashpeewaters@gmail.com. But the final forum that's scheduled in this series is Thursday, the 22nd. What's at stake? Everybody who's on this forum is already registered, so to speak, for those other forums. So you should have the link already for tonight's forum, and then I'll be sending the link out for those other two forums tomorrow to everybody who's here and the others who had registered previously. But really appreciate Andrew, Donovan, and Anastasia's time. And if anybody has any questions or anything I can do in terms of getting people information, please feel free to reach out to me. And otherwise, we'll hopefully see you at some of these other forums with some other questions.